The bottom line factors of that. You should be. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody to our committee of the whole meeting Tuesday, November 22nd. And we respectfully acknowledge that we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Clyde people, Kessler. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and have approval of the agenda as presented. John and Dennis?
Yep.
All in favor? Opposed? So for those of you that don't know, Janet sends her regrets and wishes she could be here, but can't be tonight. So we have a couple of, well, we have some delegations and presentations. So would you like to join us up at the front? Comfy chairs? And I don't know if you know everybody, but maybe we'll just go around the table and
There were your blasting off.
so, John, do you want to start us off with the?
Yes, I'm Councillor John Tidbury, and I know you all.
I'm Councillor Dennis Dugas, and I know you all.
I'm Fred Robertson, former councillor, and I don't know everyone.
Oh.
I'm 2/3.
And I'm Mayor Pat Corbett-Labatt, and I know you all too.
I'm Councillor Brian Texan, I know a few of you, and I think I've met you before.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I do know all of you. Now, formally, I've met you.
And Councillor Trina Smith, and I know almost all of you, but I don't think we've met you.
Corporal Ryan Rupp, I'm one of the supervisors of the RCP.
Becca Willison, I'm the manager of mental health and substance use and public health up here.
And I'm Shane Thomas. I'm the practice leader coordinator for adult mental health and substance use in the region.
Angela?
I'm Angela Smith. I'm the coordinator for the Mount Waddington Health Network. Thanks for having me today.
Does everybody know our CAO and everybody in the back?
Nobody knows me. Heather Nelson Smith, CAO. Lisa Bates, recording secretary.
Ross Blackwell, everything else.
Thanks for coming. Who wants to start us off?
Sure. I'm happy to start the presentation. For folks who are on the previous council, you'll be familiar with this format. It's very much like the last format, and if you're looking carefully at the editing, it may in fact be very similar. This was a 5-team special. Couple pieces, and thank you, Heather. I see folks have copies of the Q&A. So just want to start from the top. This may be repeat for some folks who are aware of a Safer Place to Be project and kind of where we came to a couple months ago and where we've expanded it from there. So some further program evaluation. So Safer Place to Be is just been a project initiative initiated in the summer with the district, police, ambulance, health authority, and local First Nations, pending capacity around supporting folks who use alcohol in public to find a safer place to be. And that's been about diffusing tension in the business core and also trying to figure out what everyone needs. So bringing a few different lenses to how we could address this issue. Originally, we were looking at issues around heat domes for the summer and temporary structures or tents, etc. And the kind of idea that came forward and the working group that's met every Friday since then has been about providing some temporary structures in Stigma Creek Park, where there would be a location where folks who use alcohol could be that would draw some of the, in part draw some of the use away from the business areas. It was also about trying to look at what the needs of that population were and having a place where those basic needs for some shelter and some sense of safety were possible. So part of that looked like a policing approach that wasn't assertive around dumping out alcohol in that space, still expecting folks to be appropriate, And then encouraging through health outreach to all the areas, but in particular to the park. So what health outreach looks like is things like provision of water, connecting with primary health care, opportunities to connect with substance use treatment, medical care, crisis basis connected to income assistance, and relationship building with folks who haven't trusted most systems, including the healthcare system. So we presented to council, and council said, okay, let's give this a go and continue to report back. And we've had a Friday working committee where we've been looking at, what are some impacts. So there's some updates there if you're looking at reporting on page 1. In the health system, which there I can speak to, August to September, we were engaging with a daily number of 49 persons per day. 18 were attached to our team, and about 31 a day were not. So we're having a lot of contact with folks who are not connected with any form of the healthcare team or supports. A lot of that work they look like in the connection of wellness checks, provision of water, which is a really basic harm reduction measure for folks who are going to use alcohol, and all those other pieces around connection with healthcare services and basic needs and emotional crises. October to November, a lower number of 27 persons per day, 15 attached to team, 12 not. With some data gaps in them. What we did notice August to October, while the tent was operational, there was increased use of the park and diversion from business areas. Although on rainy and windy days, folks tended to be back in business areas more because the tent didn't provide enough shelter. And that's why a lot of folks were staying in the business areas. And there's a core group of folks who remained in the business areas routinely. Those tend to be older folks with more mobility issues. And healthcare observed some increase in garbage in the park, as well as the number of persons who became more active in cleaning garbage. So we were handing out gift cards for folks who were like, a guy was rolling up, the tent had been damaged a couple times, or someone reinforcing with duct tape and wood that he brought. There were other folks we noticed picking garbage or taking care of the park. So just kind of incentivizing that park use caretaking. And one of the interesting pieces, and I know I've talked about this a few times, people talked about the mayor showed up when Councillor Dugas was the mayor. Was like, the mayor showed up and talked to me about what I needed. You see people taking selfies with the mayor, folks who historically have not felt like a local government cares about them, hears about them, and they're seen only as a problem to be removed. Actually had people come and say, like, what do you need? There's a huge shift. In particular, we're talking about folks who are residential school survivors or their kids, foster care system, through the prison system. People have been routinely told where to go and why to be there, and don't be here and be here. To have our local government officials come and connect with people and say, actually, I'm curious about what you need. It's a huge shift. And people continue to talk about that. So from a relational perspective, really big. We also conducted a survey in the beginning of October around folks who use alcohol in public. So we took a small sample, and you'll see the survey results on page 3. So it was 1 day sample of 14 folks. None were female or none were male. 5 were female. 13 self-reported Indigenous and 1 is Caucasian. Out of that sample, 11 are currently homeless and 3 were housed. And a year ago, 11 were housed and 3 were homeless. I think it's fairly telling as we talk about the increase there. That just speaks to itself, right? As we looked at use the shelter, 10 yes and 4 no. So there are some folks who are banned from the shelters, and been turned away by the shelter, and 12 sleep outside. And then why? We also want to know, like, where are you using alcohol in public, and also why? Like, what's your motivation? So you'll see for Sting Creek Park, the reasons were less problems or drama. These are all quotes. Younger crowd hangs out here, less RSMP involvement. People are, unless people are causing issues, which was curious to hear. Like, we know there are some pieces can be here if people are causing issues, as self-report. More private, don't get hassled from business or people on the street. Now, number 2 was Moe's Red Apple Liquor parking lot, liquor store parking lot. A younger crowd using Sting Creek, so again, there's an age difference. Potential for more violence and want to avoid fights and just hang with friends. And behind the public health, Gray Street, when it's windy and rainy, many using the tent. And so using that space again for the shelter and peace. And then we asked about what makes you feel safe in public settings. 12 people said being with family and friends in community. So that's actually a huge piece when we think about why people hang out together. Safety is an important part. Emotional safety, fear of violence, also just like sense of camaraderie. Able to move to a different area if people are too intoxicated or violent. And people say they feel safe most of the time. And being unsafe, being without your family. It also speaks some cultural values, right? Being with your family is safe. Being on your own, being isolated, being pulled apart, is not safe. And not being safe, 8 people say being around highly intoxicated people. So this amongst alcohol users saying when folks are too far or too gone, like that's not safe for them either. When there's public disorder and there's fights and like that's not, not good. And this is from users, people who use alcohol in public. And if there was a good safe place to go, we'll use alcohol in public, what would it be like? A permanent structure, at least a structure with a good roof, something to help with the wind, somewhere to stay warm and dry, seating. People want to be a clean space. Find a few structures. That's not everyone's on friendly terms. And where do you go when you're not using alcohol? Sober family and friends with housing. For those housed, they say they just stay at home. And some using the church for breakfast or coffee. So they, there are different speeds where people are at. So I guess I can speak to that part. Over to Ryan for the RCMP reporting.
Yeah, I think overall, we've seen positive outcomes beginning. We're still getting calls there. Obviously, I don't think we're ever going to get it to 0, but we can do our best. But we have seen a decrease in the severity of the calls. Like we're still, even when we're getting called there, there's less of a severity necessarily. It seems like there's been a shift recently, possibly with the weather. So like you mentioned earlier, that tent doesn't have anything on the sides to block the wind and rain coming in. So they're still going to that shelter where they can get out of the wind. But there's definitely been a decrease in the violent calls anyways in the area. Yeah.
So we weren't able to get from data from BC Emergency Health or ambulance, but there said anecdotally there's a reduction in ambulance calls through the course of this project as well. So I think we're having fewer folks kind of like passed out in the parking lot, more shade, more water, more outreach. The other piece with that as well is the shelter hours have bumped up. So that's been more recent to 3 p.m., which I can say from someone who reviews the merge list on a daily basis has radically changed what that looks like.
That's been huge for us too, just not only to be able to bring them down there at 3, but also seems like they move down there on their own. early on.
That's the Sobering Assessment Center.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks to like if there's a safer place to be at the right time.
Yeah.
People, and it's a place that feels safe and fits with those values of not being alone and being with family. That you begin to see that people, especially when people are engaged about what they need, are willing to have those conversations. So I've had a lot of conversations with folks on outreach about what's needed, what might cause problems or bumps. And there's a general interest in being able to work together with others. And also a general pushback against being told to go over there.
Right.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, sure.
So it's about that piece. Other,
I don't think there's anything new to report from the last time from the district's perspective. However, just from what we've worked on together. There's a Q&A that the group is vetting that I've put in front of all of council to have a look at. We had talked about doing an open house type format to outreach to the community to provide them some information with what's happening. And upon some further reflections with some of our other partners, it was found that now might not be the right time to do a open house format. So we wanted to try and address some of the questions that have been coming in, both to myself and Fred Handy at the RCMP, with respect to some of the concerns that are happening at the park. So with the help of both Shane, Rebecca, and Angela, the questions we heard, they've answered, and then we put it together in kind of a bit of a Q&A format, which will also have the outreach services QR code added to it. So we've given some time for some of our partners to just review that. We've given them up until Friday, and then the hope is that once we get that approved, we can have it for distribution as soon as possible.
So, Angela, any pieces around communication, the health network perspective?
I think, and this is also for you, Brian, and welcome. This is our first conversation and meeting together. So the health network, a little bit of a backgrounder. We, the network in 2012 put together an addiction and recovery substance use plan for the region. We updated it again in 2021. So just to make sure that everyone really understands that some of these smaller initiatives are part of a much larger strategy that we're working on between multi-agencies. So a lot of our messaging is central around that, the reduce of stigma around substance use, how creating safer places to be will create long-term positive impacts. So there's some reports that have come out related to addressing Indigenous specific racism in healthcare, the work we did in evaluating substance use and recovery services and looking to fill some of those gaps. So just to make sure when we're communicating about this, that we are letting people know that there's a lot of other really good work going on, and also that that we're looking at housing solutions and having lots of conversations and meetings around those topics as well. So I think that's a really critical piece of communications around this project that needs to keep being pushed to the forefront as well.
And perhaps I'll add just a little bit about the efficacy of those. So the addiction services report was created by the Health Network originally in relation to coroner's reports about 3 deaths in cells. But the fact that those groups came together, there was extensive community consultation, made a clear plan. Also, it's the reason why we have detox beds in the facility, why we have a street outreach team, why we have a harm reduction team, and why a number of other, why we have the shelter. So that kind of community planning isn't just something that sits on the shelf. We actively work with it and have become much more resourced and much more able to respond. Correspondingly, at the same time, we continue to have the housing is going the opposite way. But there's been a lot of foundational work done around the Mount Washington housing needs assessment and kind of foundational work with BC Housing, and we're at a place where we're going to move forward to this. So like Angela said, this is just about one particular small issue within a very large spectrum of work that's been happening for a solid decade that we have demonstrated success. We're not just writing reports on the shelf, they're getting results. A lot of our infrastructure has come from that kind of collaboration.
Oh, sorry, Shane. Is this a good time to bring up the housing needs assessment and the homeless count that we're doing currently?
Yeah, run with it.
Okay. So Shane's supporting. So just as a backgrounder, again, we did some work last year based on a model that's being used in rural Alberta to evaluate homelessness in rural communities. So it's quite innovative in the province. There wasn't really anything like this happening in BC. So what we did was looked at how you count folks across a region like ours, because you can't use a traditional point in time count to evaluate who is doing what where. Everyone's too spread out. And plus, people are in and out of, they're provisionally housed, they're couch surfing, that type of thing. So you may not capture them in those types of traditional surveys. So we did a first homeless count and housing needs assessment last year. We came up with about 70 respondents in Port Hardy who looked like they were either homeless or at risk of homelessness in the imminent term, and that number has been increasing. So we revised the survey a bit with the findings we had from the first version of the survey we did. And just to say how we perform this survey is through service providers. So every service provider that has touch points with vulnerable folks in the community get the survey. They help administer the survey to people that come through the doors over a set period of time. It's usually about a month. The last one we ran for 3 months. And there's unique identifiers. So when someone does a survey, we use a code of their name and birth date that indicates that they're only doing the survey once. So it's a really grassroots way to do it. And I think what's really interesting about this particular manner of doing the survey is you couldn't do this as an outside body. So you couldn't get a bunch of people to try and gather this information. It is really using the strengths of these kind of grassroots organizations who know who's in community and vulnerable. They know the new folks in the community. So it's gathering, using a lot of our community strengths to do that. So Shane's been helping run with this through the health network, and we're running it currently in Port Hardy to see what kind of numbers we're going to come up with this year. So Shane just started that last week. So any early indications on that, Shane? How are things going?
20 surveys completed on Saturday and Sunday. So there's a real uptick with that, and we want to make sure that data is collected for local use. We know that there's some hot conversations that council and other providers have been having with BC Housing. We want to make sure that we're filling that data gap so that there can be advocacy for the appropriate resources. We all know it's a need. It's clear it's a need. We just need to be able to quantify that. And so aim is by December 15th to have a good data capture and have a report early in the new year. So some folks can do some things with it. And it's happening right now. So
Right on.
I guess as a summary, thinking forward, there's also been the discussion around the situational tables, which has been the ministers of the Solicitor General approached a number of members of council about that, and Heather can speak more to the situational table. There's the upcoming housing component. I'm of the opinion that this is a useful intervention for now, not in itself, but as a spectrum as we look substance use from abstinence to harm reduction, and looking at as we develop better, safer places to be. Ultimately, the safest place to be for people is home. But that isn't the case. Everyone knows housing prices have gone squeeze, and the people at the bottom are the ones who got pushed out. Also, a lot of our folks at the bottom end of that spectrum who were housed a year ago aren't housed now. They don't have a place to be. And a lot of those folks also have a high level of trauma and concurrent alcohol disorders. And as I've discussed before, have been kind of pushed through systems. I think it's more effective if we work with people around helping them meet what they need. And actually, from a change perspective, if people don't believe that they're valued or seen or heard, they're less likely to want to engage in change because they're like, what is going to change? What actually changes things is relationships. And I say this every day, multiple times a day. Dr. Gabramati always says the opposite of addiction is not using. The opposite of addiction is connection. So when we see folks who have not been connecting, that's the grounds where people can make change. When they don't matter, when they don't have a safe place to be. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You don't have a place to live, you don't have safety, you don't have anything to eat, nothing is changing. Right? Until that stuff, no one's quitting drinking and they don't have a house and they're living outside. And they're gonna disconnect from their family and go to sleep in that bush over there? No, like we need to create conditions in which we're engaged and people know they matter. Also, limit some behavior. People want to be safe. We hear this actually from direct people using alcohol in public. They don't want a bunch of hootenanny and fights. That's part of their safety considerations too. So that part around policing and actively addressing violence is an important part. But I think this is kind of one foundation, and I'm imagining this with some kind of transitional housing, if that were to come to be. could be a really natural way to support people into a connection into streams where there's proper supports. I think that's it. I've talked a lot.
Do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Shane, for putting that together and all your hard work on that and presenting here today. Really, it's awesome. So I don't have a lot to add, but I know, like, we've rolled out for 4 months and we've seen like how effective it is, and your data that's been collected is really showing the positive changes and positive influence in it. And so I think just part of moving forward, we kind of had a 2-month plan and then we extended for a few more months, but now we're into kind of colder weather, rainier weather, where the tent isn't as an effective tool as it once was. And so just really putting forth on what our next steps would be. And yeah, and
And if I could humbly suggest, if council would be interested in having a discussion about whether or not they'd like to look at this from a pilot project to evaluating this. Obviously, that'd be public consultation, appropriate consultation with nations, and design, and RCMP have offered some connection with folks who are environmental design around safe spaces that are viewable. But just to consider whether or not a final product, but like an active discussion about if this is something that would like to be developed further as an idea for more consultation.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Angela. Brett, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do, a few things. One, I would be very interested in having that discussion going forward. And what the next steps are, and what you're thinking the next steps are. I do have one comment, and then, well, first of all, before I start, situational tables. I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, maybe
situation.
Heather, can you explain it a bit better? Because
Yeah,
not everybody will
so-
know about it.
So I'm just gonna use my face. So what we do every Friday is more of an overarching, we're addressing a problem that is culminating. It's got a bunch of different root causes associated with that. So what a situation table is it's basically bringing the same group together, but to look at individual case files.
Yeah.
And so the RCMP would bring forward an individual case of something that's going on within the community with a particular individual. And you would have people sitting at the table, like mental health and addictions. You'd have Ministry of Community and Child and Family Welfare. You'd have, Island Health. You'd have basically all the resources at one table. And then they would be able to actually address the issues of that particular individual, which would then help that overarching problem that we have over here by dealing with some of the root causes that might be happening. So one of the other things that happens at the situational table is because it's backed by the ministry, it also bridges the gaps. So when we can't find connections in order to support within community, we can actually go to the province, and the province can actually bring forward resources in order to assist us. So just in terms of statistical information, so last year, 26% of case files were brought forward to situation tables. There's 31 in the province. 92% of those files were actually assigned to somebody else other than RCMP and dealt with by a different agency, so that RCMP aren't having to deal with things that aren't RCMP issues. So we did have a discussion with the staff. They're interested in an application coming forward from the District of Port Hardy. There is seed funding that goes into that, so it's about $45,000. 25,000 of that is training and a consultant to get us up and running so that we all work together and we have a proper format. And then there's about $20,000 of administration that covers that as well. And so the district's role would be providing that administrative support to that table.
Mhm.
And we'd also be the funnel for that money and the training to go out. But their turnaround time is about a week to 10 days on an application. So if we got something in December, we'd know and be up and running by February.
Thank you for that. Coming from an education background, it's kind of what we longed for sometimes in dealing in certain situations and never actually saw a whole lot of more so as time went on. just two comments. One, with the respondents with the question there, and there was 14 respondents, where number 2 was people were staying away from the Stink Creek area because there's potential for violence. Is that an ongoing issue? Because it kind of is antithetical to the purpose of the project if we're trying to make a safe place and people are staying away because they feel there's violence there. Is that just an individual, based on a few individuals or situation?
Yeah, there was a bit of an age gap, so most of the time we have one space operating.
Yeah.
It's Stink Creek Park, and what we heard from the older folks, so I didn't put the age sample beside there without too much data. The folks who are staying at most are a little bit older, a little bit less mobile, and didn't always get along with the younger crew, and there was one tent.
Yeah.
So I think it was more about not having adequate spaces to separate different groups of folks.
That's how I see it.
So there is a potential solution then.
Yeah, there's
It's not
potential
hard.
solution, right? And it was like, you know, the one community folks in one space. But it really was, the folks who are saying we love Stink Creek Park, it's great, were the 19 to 35s, and the folks who are like, I said we're like definitely the 45 to 60 crew. And some of the things they talked about is we had a couple different spaces, we might have to not have our crews hanging out together. Yeah.
And that did happen a little bit when there were two tents,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
when there was a sunny day and people were over in under that shaded treed area as well. And I think when we walked by one time and a gentleman was reinforcing the tent, and we talked about their needs and what would work, they did speak to having, you know, it'd be good if there was another section because we don't all get along at times.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And just one quick comment that with the new premier, with new bills being introduced in the House, with the data that's actually being hard data collected here, I know there's some immediate money coming out, and there's going to be some very short-term funding coming out, both in housing and in safety. And I just think that we are well placed to sort of have an immediate seat at the front of that line because of the foresight of the folks, you folks that have done that work. And I'm hoping that that's the case and that we can take advantage of some of that money coming out, particularly in terms of housing. So it's just, yeah, the more hard data that we have, unfortunately, the stronger our case will be. And I think we need to be quite observant, and there will be some funding coming out very soon. Some has already been announced, so.
Yeah, it's all for urban areas, but that's my negativity.
That's okay, we can change there.
Yeah. John,
Yeah, my question is, Shane, the people that are sleeping outside. I've seen a few times, and people, they're walking along Hardy Bay Road and things like that. Is those the type of, is that the group that's kind of finding places to sleep elsewhere?
I think there's a couple folks who have some form of accommodation further out of town, and struggle to get back out to that accommodation. A couple of folks who we'll find in the road from time to time. So
I've seen, like I say, it's a normal group of about seven to 8 people that are walking on Hardy Bay Road, and they're walking in the morning. So I'm thinking that they found shelter someplace,
right,
away from Stink Creek or the liquor store area or
there's a few apartments at the old Toyota apartments.
okay.
And then there's some folks who are set up at some of the campgrounds.
Okay,
And so.
so they all
sometimes-
meet together.
Yeah, and one person's got a trailer and you've got 7, 8 people squished in there because they're tired of the shelter or they're. And then they all get kicked out of the trailer after, you know, there's.
Yeah.
But there's, there
And
are a
I'm
couple. there are a
just getting
couple
an
spots.
idea of, you know, the distance that the individual is walking to sleep.
Yeah, it is a bit of a distance and people are willing to go a fair ways. Yeah.
Okay,
It's problematic, especially when people have mobility issues too, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. Good then. Thank you for that question, John.
This gives me a better idea, because I got
John's got
something
an
in the
idea.
planning.
Yeah.
Something's percolating in the back of his mind.
Well, thank you all for so much of your work. Like, it's so good to see everyone working together, and that's the only way we can really come up with a solution. I know that when we had met before, we were talking about how critical it is to house people, and that's what are we gonna do in the immediate? So I just wonder, it's good to hear there's funding coming, but from just this survey, we have 12 people sleeping outside. Those were only the ones that were captured. So is this something that we're working on for these vulnerable? They probably all can't fit in the shelter.
And so the housing and homeless count will give us that hard data,
Right.
right? And as well, the Glasala Napaga with the other two local bands have come together to offer some extended housing or overnight shelter at the Glasala Napaga. There's some little, not little, there's a bit of collection and they're working on it. But there are still people sleeping in the rock.
Would the housing be at the, at the annex?
No, I'll.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering.
So there's other things happening in the background because Salvation Army, it's not big enough to house everybody overnight and.
I will say, you know, there have been multiple mornings where I reviewed the emergency department list where we have folks who are homeless with exposure. So, you know, that's in our merge, or apartment meals emerge at least twice a week to date, and I anticipate that will only be expanded, be more common morning presentation.
Dennis, did you have anything?
Oh, just great. Thank you for coming and presenting this to us and getting us up to date where we're at. And I guess, yeah, as you mentioned already, what's our next move now? We're gonna sit down and talk about that real quick. How we're gonna move forward. We did the pilot, we've got this, we got the statistics, the data to go with it. Now, what's the next step? I see Angela's got her hand up.
I was going to say there are some next steps happening with Wellness First at the Health Network. So the Housing Coalition, the work there is still ongoing. So Kyla right now is down in Vancouver at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association conference. And she's been gathering data and working on the community profiles, working on available land assessments, that type of stuff with the RD to try and pull together that data so that as we get this information on homelessness, as we start to pull together the work that Shane and Rebecca have been doing in health, we're hoping that that will all come up together and we can start the new year with some really strong data that way and really take a good look at that housing coalition model and what we can pull from that information. And then there's some other work with the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness. And they've been engaged quite a bit up here recently as well too. So those things I think are worthy of note, and we should probably have a Wellness First meeting, I'd imagine, in December before the end of the year.
Brian, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think it's all new to me. It's really good to see this from like a professional and statistical standpoint, as from being on the outside, just kind of not really knowing, and now be able to get involved and actually be able to listen to everything and hear everything that's going on. I love this because bridging the gap in communication between everybody and the public is such a big thing. I mean, I'll be so honest. I have friends that are just so archaic in their thinking of what's happening, and that gap in education needs to be, because you know, like you speak about these people and that they don't feel supported, they don't feel safe. I'm sure a lot of that is the pressure, I'm sure, from people just staring at them and not being understanding and just not being educated in substance abuse and what these people have gone through. I think this is just so great to actually see how much, like, I'm actually baffled how much work you guys put in, how much, like, you know, it's almost overwhelming to me, which is a good thing, means that you guys are doing so much. I'm looking forward to being able to get involved. I'd love to, you know, get together and learn more as much as I can, because this is such a big issue that I definitely care deeply about, and I want to help out as much as I can. Again, thank you guys.
And feel free to reach out at green cards, but we
Yeah.
can get in contact just to like probably just sit down and even like informally just like.
Yeah, just to sit down and just learn, and like, you guys know so much that I have no idea about, that I'd love to just sit down and sponge off you guys, because one thing I can definitely do is start being an advocate for education and bridging that gap between, you know, citizens and everyone about what's going on, and, you know, get rid of that archaic thinking of, you know, this is just a problem and that's it, right? So I'd love to sit down and learn more.
Awesome.
I'll definitely get the business card up, yeah.
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 I'll take it. That's awesome. And one thing I love about here, and we're almost out of time, but you know, local government is where a lot of things get done. And so, you know, we often have the health authority up to the Minister of Health, but round tables like this is where we actually get to experiment. And local government, I mean, it's always been the laboratory of democracy. It's where people can get things done on a different level. So this is, I'm really, really grateful that we get to be able to do this and work with all our partners. And the tables we're developing aren't just about the solution, they're about like the relationships to support our community. And you can only do that, I think, in these small places really effectively. So this is like a real honor, and this is really exciting, awesome work, because I think we can really actually get something done. There's
So-
also bugs.
Thank you very much for coming in. It's too bad we're almost, well, we are out of time, but I do know that you do have an ask. And we won't make a decision tonight, but you do have an ask.
So the ask is going to be, will council consider evaluating this as a more permanent project, right? Inclusive of all the things that have to involve, you know, budgeting, communications, consultation, about having something that looks like a permanent structure, in conjunction with partnership from ourselves, as one of the many facets of addressing public intoxication, along with our existing kind of a policing approach. I think it's borne some fruit. I think it's worth a serious look at having something a little more permanent that can address this, that can minimize those bumps in the business area, that can provide a safer place, not on its own, but part of a continuum along with housing and the situational tables, like one thread in a rope, right? But I think it's an important thread because this is the raw edge, right? And this is where it's the roughest and on the most on the edge. So back any other bits in the lens?
Just like when you said a structure, that just in my mind went, or whatever that looks like in the park, that'll meet the needs of the folks that we're trying to serve.
Multiple structures, probably.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
separate them
to be
all.
fair,
Exactly.
it may not be in that park.
Mhm.
Part of it would be the environmental, what was it called? The did you bring it up at the meeting?
Me?
Environmental scan.
September,
What's
I
that?
believe you're talking about September,
Yes, and-
prevention through environmental designs.
yeah. And so, I mean, they may come, like it would be a consultant looking at the whole town and coming up with the most appropriate area. Because we have heard from, now I'm going on, have heard from the ambulance attendants, paramedics, that it's difficult to get down to that structure.
Yeah.
So this is just a temporary structure, but I think too, not that pushing it, one of the asks is have another tent down there for an extent, a little bit longer.
Yeah, so that's the extension while everyone looks at it, this as a serious kind of project.
So thank you. We have to end it now, but, and we will be discussing it further because, as you know, it's a really important issue for our people, even for our town.
Thanks, Edward.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.
No, I'd love to, and we just like.
Thanks.
Fred.
Yeah, just answer.
So we'll